The murder of Jeffrey Dahmer is actually a very interesting story. This is Christopher Scarver, the man that killed Jeffrey Dahmer and another inmate. Christopher himself was already in prison for murdering someone during a robbery. And on the morning of November 28, 1994, Christopher Scarver, while cleaning out the prison gymnasium with Jeffrey Dahmer, beat Jeffrey Dahmer and another prisoner named Jesse Anderson to death in the gymnasium area with an exercise bar. Now, it's interesting because people really don't know that much about Jesse Anderson, but he was also in prison serving a life sentence for murdering his wife. And initially, Jesse tried to blame the murder of his wife on two black men. But it was eventually discovered that Jesse himself was the one that murdered his own spouse. But this actually wasn't the first attempt on Jeffrey Dahmer's life. Earlier that year in 1994, Osvaldo DeRuthi tried to slash Jeffrey Dahmer's throat in the chapel after the church service that Sunday. Christopher Scarver claimed he killed Dahmer because he had unrepentant eyes and would make body parts out of his food. It was a shocking end to a shocking story. This is Jimmy Savile, one of the worst pedophiles in world history. And let me warn you, this is a really disturbing story, so viewer discretion is advised. Jimmy Savile was an English DJ, radio and television personality, and a very, very famous entertainer. Jimmy came from practically nothing and became a superstar in England. When he was younger during World War II, he worked in coal mines, but he eventually started wrestling and then DJing, and that's where he really rose to fame. Now, people in England loved Jimmy Savile. During his illustrious career, he was knighted by the Queen herself, and he was known to be great friends with the royal family. He also hosted a number of huge British television shows like Top of the Pops, and he had his own kids show called Jim'll Fix It. And when Jimmy died in 2011, the country of England mourned him. They were really sad to see him go, but that's also when all of these accusations came out. And soon people knew the truth about Jimmy Savile, and he was not a good guy. When Jimmy was alive, he was known to be charitable, and he worked at hospitals and volunteered his time helping with sick kids and young adults. But this is how he got access to his victims, by acting like the nice guy. And in his time on Earth, Jimmy Savile sexually abused over 400 kids and young adults. He would literally seek out children in their weakest states when they were in the hospital recovering from operations, and that's when he would abuse them. But something that I find extremely disturbing about this whole story is that everybody around Jimmy Savile knew that he was a pedophile, but no one was reporting it. In the hospitals that he volunteered at, nurses would literally tell the children to act like they were asleep when Jimmy was around because they feared what he would do to them. Friends of Jimmy's would make jokes about him being a pedophile in their comedy routines. Even powerful people at the BBC knew that Jimmy Savile was sexually assaulting children, hundreds of children, but they did nothing. You see, he was worth too much. He was too valuable to them. And they needed him to make as much money for them as possible. One particularly gruesome and sick thing that emerged about Jimmy Savile after he died was that he used to go to the morgue in these hospitals, and he would actually have sex with dead bodies. He would also move the bodies around in the morgue, pose them, and take photos of them, laughing while he was doing this. And one nurse even reported watching Jimmy Savile wheel around the dead body of a 4-year-old child in a stroller. Yeah, this guy was incredibly twisted, and he affected so many people's lives. And another sad part of this story is that Jimmy Savile never really had to face any sort of repercussions for his actions while he was alive. When he died as a beloved public figure, somebody that people looked up to and adored. But behind closed doors, Jimmy Savile was a sexual deviant, a pedophile, and just a horrible human being. There is so much to this story, I'm telling you, I couldn't even cover this whole story in 10 TikToks, but if you want me to go into more details about all this, let me know and I'll post a part 2. Because this is literally only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Jimmy Savile and some of the horrible and atrocious things that he did while he was alive. The movie The Exorcist is cursed in real life, and the stories of deaths, weird supernatural occurrences, and other strange things that happen to the cast and crew will shock you. Get ready, this is a disturbing story. So if you somehow don't know The Exorcist, it's a horror movie that was released in 1973, and it was extremely controversial. I'm talking about people who were going to just see the movie were claiming that the theaters were haunted, the films were haunted. Actress Linda Blair even had to have bodyguards for 6 months after the film's release because people were sending her death threats. Yeah, they thought she was actually possessed. But now let's talk about the actual curse. This is actress Ellen Burstyn, who plays the possessed girl Regan's mom in the film. In one scene of the film, she's thrown from the bed by her possessed daughter. And in this stunt, she actually landed improperly. It was just set up wrong, and she ended up injuring her spine permanently. And the scream from this life-changing injury that she sustained is actually kept in the film. The pain, you can hear it. Then you have the deaths. This is actor Jack McGowan, and he played an alcoholic director who was Reagan's first victim in the film. The Exorcist would end up being his last movie. Right after completing the filming for his role in The Exorcist, he contracted the flu and died shortly afterwards. Actress Linda Blair and Max von Sydow, who played the father in the film, also lost family members during production of the movie. And Jason Miller, who played the other father in the film, actually had a very strange experience during production as well. Apparently, he was on lunch break reading some lines for his next scene when a Jesuit priest walked up to him and handed him a gold medallion. And this priest basically told him that he should rebuke the devil and find God. Members of the production crew also claimed that the set itself was haunted. Even the author of The Exorcist, William Peter Blatty, said that he saw a phone lift up off of its hook and fall to the ground multiple times. This happened right next to him. Objects would move around by themselves, lights would turn on and off, but that doesn't even include the fire. So because the cast and crew felt like the set was haunted, they actually consulted their religious technical advisor, a man named Thomas Birmingham, and they asked him to do an exorcism on the set of the film. Now, Thomas said he wouldn't because he didn't want to freak out the rest of the cast and crew and play into superstition, but the following day, after they asked him to exorcise the set, the entire set burned to the ground after a bird flew into an electrical box and ignited a fire. But miraculously, the one room that survived on the entire set, which was practically untouched, was the room where the exorcism takes place in the movie. But the curse of The Exorcist goes on and even touches other movies in the film franchise. And it even plagued movie theaters. Famous preachers said that the film reels that the film was distributed with were haunted. And in one extremely strange case in Italy, lightning actually struck an ancient church across the street from where The Exorcist was playing and toppled a 400-year-old cross from the building. There was also an actor in the film named Paul Bateson who ended up being a suspected serial killer. He was confirmed to have killed at least one person, but they think he may be responsible for a string of deaths. And I can make a whole TikTok about that because that's a crazy story. But let me know in the comments below. Do you believe in the Exorcist movie curse? This is Shannon McCool, one of the worst pedophiles of all time. I'm going to warn you right now, this story is incredibly disturbing and hard to listen to, so viewer discretion is advised. Shannon McCool is from Australia, and according to interviews that he gave after his arrest, he started having these feelings towards other children when he was 15 years old. So from a very young age, he felt these pedophilic behaviors and desires. In the year 2011, he began working for the Families SA, which is a part of the Australian government that oversees childcare and abuse. And through this government job, he was able to get access to hundreds of children. These kids had been through it all already. They came from abusive and negative backgrounds, and he took this and used it to his advantage. He was able to get access to these kids for years, and even though other employees reported that he had been acting inappropriately with these youngsters, nothing happened. The government agencies ignored these red flags and kept him under their employment. But in the shadows, Shannon was engaging in some of the most deplorable internet behavior I've ever read about. He was a moderator for a website called The Love Zone, a website which had connections to Peter Scully, Richard Huckle, and a number of other pedophiles that we've talked about here on my TikTok in the past. But apparently, for other pedophiles to get access to this massive library of CP and become a member of the Love Zone, they had to upload their own user-generated CP at least once a month. This means that Shannon wasn't just taking kids from residential homes, abusing them, filming the videos, and putting them up on the internet for other people to seek out. He was actually encouraging people all across the planet to commit their own atrocious things. And he would then tell them that if you want access to his media, you would have to upload your own. So he was encouraging just so much abuse across the planet. According to Shannon, the first time that he had done something like this was in 2011 when he picked up a kid from childcare, was driving him home, pulled the car over, touched him inappropriately, filmed it, and then uploaded it. And from that point going forward, he was gone, and he eventually worked his way up to being one of the biggest pedophiles on the internet, dealing CP to millions across the globe. One of his alleged offenses even includes the assault of an 18-month-old child. But eventually, Shannon's crimes would come to the light. And that's when Task Force Argo stepped in, a division of the Queensland Police Service who specifically investigate child exploitation and abuse online. I find it interesting that they use a scorpion as their logo for the task force because the scorpion is the natural predator of the Australian stone spider, and pedophiles in Australian prisons are referred to as stone spiders. Well, eventually, there's a longer story that I could go into this about how the police actually ended up running a pedophile website and busting a ton of people, but that led them to Shannon McCool's house. Now, when they investigated his home, they found over 53,000 CP images, a good number of which he was actually directly involved with producing. And in total, after all of their investigation was completed, they had recovered over 100,000 CP still images and over 600 videos from Shannon. In 2015, he received 35 years in prison for his crimes, but recently his sentence was slashed. And I don't think that he'll be in there long enough. This pedophile married her victim and eventually had children with him. This is the twisted story of Mary Kay Letourneau. So Mary Kay has a really interesting life story. Her father was a senator in California. Her brother was a counsel to George H.W. Bush. And yeah, her family was really politically plugged up, but Mary wanted to be a teacher. And eventually she started teaching at Shorewood Elementary. And it was at this elementary where she met 12-year-old Ville Fuelau. Keep in mind, at the time, Mary Kay was a 34-year-old teacher and Ville was only a 12-year-old. So at the time, keep in mind, Mary was married to a man named Steve. And before this affair with her student happened, she had fathered 4 children with her husband. So Mary was married with kids when she started this relationship with a 12-year-old. So after having Ville as a student in her class, Mary started this relationship that went from platonic to something more very quickly. And on June 18, 1996, the police found her in a parking lot with Ville. As a police officer approached the car that they were in, Mary tried to hop into the front seat and Ville played dead and acted like he was asleep in the back. And even though the police checked them for identification, Ville lied and said that he was over 18 years old and that he was a family friend of Mary's. Mary said that she had gotten into an argument with her husband and they were just talking, nothing had happened in the car. The police then called Ville's parents and his mom said that he should just go back with his teacher. And still, the police thought nothing out of all of this and they returned him back into her care so she could continue to assault him. But less than a year later, a relative of her husband's would contact the police and let them know that he had heard and seen some strange things going on with Mary Kay. She would be arrested, put on trial, and she was eventually convicted of 2 counts of child abuse. I can't say the word here, but yeah. So after her trial, she was sentenced to 6 months in jail. She was given 3 months suspended, so she really only had to serve 3 months, and she was then released. But just 2 weeks after she got out of jail for serving her time for the abuse of a minor, she was found in another car with Ville. And this time she had a passport, cash, all sorts of other documents, and it looked like she was going to flee the country with the minor. So before long she was back in court again, but this time she served over 7 years in prison. And it was while in prison while she gave birth to her second child with Ville. Yes, she had 2 children with the child that she was assaulting. In 2004, though, Mary Kay was released from prison. Ville actually petitioned to have the no contact order dropped, and the couple got married in 2005. And for the rest of their life, they led a allegedly happy life together. They had children together, and yeah, Mary Kay ended up dying in the year 2020. Now, I don't know how to feel about this entire story. It is just so strange. And I think that there definitely was a lot of brainwashing going on here. I mean, there's no way to excuse Mary Kay's behavior. She was 34 years old, initially assaulting a 12-year-old student of hers. But yeah, the 2 of them gave a number of interviews before Mary Kay passed away, and they said that they're really happy. He said that he totally forgave her for doing whatever she did to him, and that they're happy now. I don't know. I just don't know how to feel about this. It's such a weird story. Matt Lauer, the former host of The Today Show, is one of the most dangerous sexual predators in American history. A lot of you guys may have forgotten this story or don't know the details of this horrific story, but I'm going to remind you there are graphic details we're going to talk about, so viewer discretion is advised. So for decades, you couldn't turn on NBC News in the morning and not see this face, Matt Lauer. He was born in New York City in 1957, and years later he would work for The Today Show and become one of the biggest, most watched TV show hosts in the mornings. I certainly remember growing up watching NBC in the mornings, The Today Show, always seeing Matt Lauer. I mean, he was an integral part of morning news. And at one point, The Hollywood Reporter even named him the most powerful voice in news media. So obviously, Matt Lauer had a lot of influence, a lot of famous friends, and a lot of power in the industry. So let's jump forward to 2017. At about the same time that all the charges were coming out about Harvey Weinstein being a sexual predator, suddenly Matt Lauer's name began to be published in the news. And no, it wasn't because he was reporting on the news himself. It was because he was a dangerous predator that was about to be exposed. So November 27th, 2017, Matt Lauer is randomly fired from The Today Show after working there for decades. And on that day, a message was sent to all NBC employees by the chairman, saying that they had terminated Matt because they had received a complaint about him about inappropriate sexual behavior in the workplace. And even though they said there was only one complaint, they said that they knew that there was something more. And at this point, this is when the true allegations began to come to light, and let me warn you again, some of these are really disturbing. So according to one employee that came out and told her story, Matt Lauer had been making inappropriate gestures and remarks about her since the late 1990s. And she said that in 2001, Matt Lauer had assaulted her. Apparently on that day, he had asked her to come to his office to discuss a story that he was working on. And then when she came in, he locked the door behind her, he asked her to take her shirt off, and then proceeded to assault her. Mid-assault, she passed out, and when she woke up, she was on the floor, and Matt Lauer was looking over her. He then asked one of his other workers to come help her out of his office and bring her to a nurse, which once again shows that people working around this guy who was in a position of power, just helped him carry out all of these crimes and were never checked on it. And this brings us to the infamous button on the desk. So yes, this is a proven fact that Matt Lauer had a button located on and under his desk. And when he pressed that button, he could lock the door to his office, effectively sealing whoever he had invited inside of his office inside. And this button plays a part in all of these accusations. Apparently Matt Lauer would lock people in his office and subject them to all of these assaults, inappropriate comments, inappropriate conduct, and they had no way of escaping because of this hidden button. Now, eventually, lots of former employees and coworkers would come out and say that Matt Lauer had assaulted them, and this disturbing pattern of inappropriate behavior became public knowledge. All of his former coworkers, including people like Katie Couric, said that they completely cut him off. And after his firing, Matt Lauer didn't receive a single penny from NBC. Now, one of the sad things about all of this is that no charges were ever formally brought against Matt Lauer, so even though he had assaulted lots of different women, he was never really punished for it other than losing his job and losing his favor in the public eye. But according to friends, Matt Lauer is now reserved. He doesn't go out, he doesn't see anybody. All of his famous friends have stopped talking to him, so I'm assuming that his life is miserable.